The broadcasting voice, which you are accustomed to hearing to on news programs, was originally developed due to the fact that on old vintage radios, only staccato delivery could cut through the static and low fidelity. Despite getting past this technological hurdle, people still to this day use the broadcasting voice when delivering the news. Like the broadcasting voice, is forecast pudding a relic of the past which just should exist because it has existed for so long, or is it time to move on to something greater, something new, and something a little bit more fair? In this video, I've asked many top players around the world on their opinions on if pudding should be banned, and I've also asked you online what other cards you think should be banned as well. We'll first talk about pudding because that is the most heated debate of the day. Talk about some other cards which you have suggested to me that should be on the ban list that's coming out tomorrow as of the time of uploading this video, as well as my final thoughts on what I would do if I were Bandai banning cards. Without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe so I can stop doing this voice. I believe that the topic on whether or not forecast pudding should or should not be banned is very similar to the Newcomb's paradox. If you don't know what that is, it's far too long for this video, but I will link a video in the description. The interesting thing as well is that most people who choose one side are absolutely confident in their stance. They think that it's unreasonable to think of any other side to this. And I think that forecast pudding is very similar to this. Those who think that forecast pudding should be banned cannot understand the people who think that it shouldn't be banned. Conversely, the people who think that it shouldn't be banned think that all the people who think that should be banned are just bad at the game. And so in preparation for this video, I asked Twitter as well as my community Discord server on whether or not they think that the card should be banned. And these are the results. Almost a perfect split down the middle. 51% of you think that it should be banned and 49% think that it shouldn't, meaning that this topic is going to be a lot more controversial than I thought it may be. On one side, we have people like Grenay who gave me a very eloquently worded response on why he thinks that pudding should be banned, and also a TLDR. Yes, too high ceiling due to randomness, but we'll need a replacement card. I think this is perfectly fair. And on the other hand, we have people like Wimmy who said, no. But in all seriousness, this topic isn't about whether or not you're good or bad at the game as much as people like to strawman this argument. There are really high players on both sides that agree with either stance. For example, this is what Impact had to say in favor of pudding being banned. Pudding should be banned. It is more about the random aspect of the card than anything else. The card erases the history of the entire game. Every decision, whether you counter or take a hit, means you decided to keep a card. Every search you've made, every play you've made up until this point was based around the knowledge of the hand cards you have. It erases all strategic planning you've made up until this point. It's also the card in the game that can erase the most raw amount of cards. It doesn't punish greed, it punishes people for playing the game. You can't take a life on turn 2 because you're afraid of taking 3 cards away. Also, resetting people's 5 to 6 card hands to gamble away their events isn't strategic, it's frustrating for both players. On the other hand, we have 2026 Worlds representative Rick Master Flash in favor of not banning pudding. This is what he has to say. I think pudding shouldn't be banned. The card doesn't inherently gatekeep decks or do anything oppressive, but the problem is that it can steal games, create insane recency bias that makes it such a hated card. Like, genuinely, it's not doing anything unfair. It usually benefits from unfair combos, like very powerful cards like Jozu or Femur plus 9 cost Boa. There's also the fact that playing pudding is a gamble in the first place because it's not guaranteed value. This is important because there's a lot of cards that are played and are extremely strong but have guaranteed value. I also like the natural idea that if you have too many cards in hand, you can get punished by pudding. I think that the most cited argument for whether or not pudding is a fair card is the fact that she punishes decks for going too high in hand size. A deck like Lucy or Ace in a world where pudding doesn't exist can go completely unchecked and accrue an insane amount of cards in their hand. Sure, if you play 4-cost pudding on a 12-card hand, this is going to absolutely devastate the opponent, serving its purpose to punish the opponent's large hand size. But from my discussion with high-level players, it's not about the hand size punishment that actually is the most devastating part about this card, it is the RNG factor. And no one has said this more directly than the 2-time Worlds representative Jackson Huang, who said, yes, because it introduces a big layer of RNG. Though cards like Gum Gum Giant aren't that prevalent anymore due to the fact that purple Straw Hat leaders aren't as good as they were a couple of sets ago, when these decks were prevalent, the actual smartest play to do on the opponent, even if they had 5, sometimes even 4 cards in their hand on final turns, is to just pudding them to hope that they don't draw something like Gum Gum Giant. This isn't punishing large hand sizes, this is just re-randomizing the game for both parties, diminishing a game of lots of pushing and pulling to a simple coin flip of whether or not you draw your counter or not in the end. I am of the opinion that pudding should be banned. However, I think that rather than me explaining my stance, although I already have somewhat, the best way to explain why I think that pudding should be banned is to talk to the #1 pudding hater in the world, Hervoye headset number 2 in the world in the first World Championship that we ever had. Putting, when played correctly, equates to a weighted coin flip, which in most cases determines the outcome of the game on the spot. If it denied the crucial play or cards, Sanji putting on 5, Moria on 10, Giant in hand to defend, it results in a win. But in both cases, it invalidated a majority of prior decision making and left it all to one random shuffle. It's possible to neatly play around the card one ahead, but when even or behind, it represents a risk which creates another coin flip in decision making. Respect putting and fall behind naturally even if the opponent didn't draw or run it, or disrespect putting and face the coin flip. Far more often, the latter is the correct choice, and it again reduces the game to one shuffle of the deck at a critical juncture. The argument that putting is needed as a stopgap for decks amassing hand size doesn't matter because hand size doesn't win games. Boards win games, and sufficiently winning board will shred any hand size realistically achievable in the game. Putting isn't a card that punishes hand size, it's a card that introduces a randomized answer to threats blue decks otherwise have no efficient answer to. Put the opponent on 50 to 75% chance to see the card they want to play, and that leap of faith is your most important decision of the game. There were multiple matchups throughout the years where blue decks win rates was equal to the chance of putting denying specific plays. The reason why this discussion is so nuanced is because it's not just about punishing people for amassing large hand sizes, it's about the randomness factor, resetting all the progress that people have built up until this game. One way of fixing this problem, like Renee suggested, would be to make a replacement card, for example, a 4-cost 4000 which just reduces the opponent's hand size down to 5, but they can choose which cards to throw away. On the other hand, you have people like our local market manipulator, Vampire Gaming, who says that we should have a putting for every single color because every color should respect this sort of threat. On the other hand, we have some psychopaths like Collectibles who say that 4-cost putting, no, that should be a 4-cost 6000. And I say, no, absolutely not. But in my opinion, the reason why I think that putting should be banned is because I think that this can open up a lot of design space for blue. We saw a lot of card draw effects come into blue now that things like the blue Nami leader have been banned, and I believe that something like putting being banned may create more space for the designers to make stronger cards that rip cards of the opponent's hand, specifically in blue, the card draw color. Recently, Bandai's design philosophy when it comes to banning cards has not necessarily been about destroying the decks that are powerful right now. Otherwise, we never would have had things like the 4-cost Reject or the 6-cost Raigo being banned. But it's to allow them to create more powerful cards within a color and prevent these cards from becoming problems later on. Though I don't think that cards like Raigo or Reject were massive problems around the time that they were banned, if they existed at this current point in time, I do think that they would be extremely problematic because yellow as a whole has become a lot stronger, but yellow could only become this strong because these sorts of cards couldn't exist. Yellow doesn't have top-end removal, so therefore their ability to heal life is a lot stronger now. Imagine, for example, if we had Raigo right now in OP15, where you could go Raigo on 1 life into the 4-cost Aura to heal back up to 2. This would be completely obscene, which is one of the main reasons why I don't think that a card like Raigo would ever come back to the game. It's for all of these reasons that I believe that a card like 4-cost putting should not exist within the One Piece card game in its current state and should outright be banned. The design team can then use the void that putting would leave in blue as a whole because it would drastically reduce the color power that it has to create stronger cards that can punish the opponent's actual hand size while not introducing things like randomness. There's also other cards like the SC10 4-cost Law which randomly rip cards out of the opponent's hand, and we haven't seen any cards printed like that in a very, very long time. I believe that this is probably indicative of Bandai's design philosophy trying to reduce the amount of random elements in the game, because although that card is extremely fun to play, it can be absolutely devastating if they just randomly grab 2 of your key cards or your counter cards, and now you're left with nothing to do, and it's just completely up to randomness whether or not that would have happened. Putting does the same thing orders of magnitude higher and is generic, therefore meaning that if you're going against blue as a whole, this is an omnipresent threat, meaning that essentially you're not allowed to go up to 7 to 8 cards in hand ever when fighting blue as a color. Putting is the only card that can win you the game without ever being played. The threat of this card is far too omnipresent, and I believe that this card should be #1 priority on the ban list tomorrow. So with that all being said, let's talk about some other cards that may end up on the ban list as well, as suggested by you, because while putting is problematic, there are of course a couple of other problematic cards in the game. Let's get straight into it. This channel, hopefully for a long time, is going to be sponsored by SleeveChief, the best supply brand in the world. Now, SleeveChief has given me a lot of flexibility in these sponsor segments, so I can do some really goofy things that I hope you'll find enjoyable for the time to come, but they wanted me to let you know that the new Arcana Key collection, as well as the Darkness collection, is now out today. These deck boxes, as well as the 9-sleeve binder in their store right now, and personally, I absolutely love this Oh my god. We don't get very many custom supplies in Japan, so I don't really have a point of reference, but to the official supplies that I have used, this is far beyond anything I could have ever comprehended. And I honestly think that this is a product worthy of its elite name. This is truly a beautiful one-of-a-kind product, and if you go to my link in the description, you can buy it through my code, which of course helps me out as well. Thank you for SleeveChief for becoming a long-term sponsor of this video, and let's talk about some more bands. Woo! Ow! Ah! 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 The bulk of this video is going to be about if 4 cost splitting should or should not be banned, but of course there are other cards that are in the discussion of being banned as well. I've made banlist predictions in the past before which have all been terribly wrong, but I think that I finally understand exactly how Bandai functions. There are a couple of factors that I believe go into their decision making for whether cards should or should not be banned. The first one, and one of the key factors for why certain cards in the past haven't been banned, I think is recency. If a card came out very recently and the set is still on shelves, though maybe not really that much overseas, then banning a card from that set is really devastating to their sales as a company. But also for the people who decide to invest in those cards knowing that they were very strong, only to have them banned a couple of weeks into the set, for example, can feel really bad as well. Unless the deck is so toxic to the game, like in the case of OP03 Newgate, I generally don't think that they'll ban anything from the last 2 sets when it comes to ban lists. The second factor, and one that they have started to go against a little bit more, is banning cards with alt arts or SRs. Most of the time, I think if it's possible to address the issues that they want to address while banning only a common or uncommon card, they will of course want to take that option as well to not devalue the cost of the fancy alternate arts or even the regular base art SRs that exist within the game. Though we have had cards with alternate arts that have been banned in the past for being far too problematic, we've also had things like NES Lobby and Lucci being pinpoint targeted to reduce the deck's power by a little bit, but not fully destroying the deck nor the value of the cards within it. Lastly, the design philosophy that I noticed when they banned things like the 6-cost Daigo as well as the 8-cost Moria is banning cards for the overall health of a color. 8-cost Moria, by the time that it was banned, wasn't necessarily a huge threat, but because 8-cost Moria didn't exist within the meta, we were allowed to get different versions of 8-cost Moria, like the new 8-cost Nami, 7-cost Robin, or like the 6-cost Moria. These cards are more specifically designed to be actually better for the decks that they're made for, but probably couldn't have existed if Moria existed due to the fact that people would just end up putting in both. So therefore, even if a card isn't specifically broken right now, I think that there may be a couple of cards that they either restrict or ban depending on how healthy they think it may be for the game. Personally, in this ban cycle, I don't think that any cards necessarily need to be banned outside of problematic cards right now. I think the game is still fairly balanced right now, even with some pretty powerful combos in the game, so I don't necessarily think that there are any hugely problematic cards that need to be banned, but Bandai likes to just throw the dart at the dartboard and something will randomly get banned, so I'm sure that my predictions are going to be wrong, at least to some extent. With that being said, let's talk about the biggest topic of discussion, the 5-cost Borsellino. This 5-cost 6,000 power character with 1,000 counter has blocker, and on play, if you have 2 or less life, you gain 1 life. This card is obscenely broken in all facets just due to the fact that it's a 5-cost 6,000 power blocker, which is already a good stat line. It also has counter, and it has the ability to heal 1 life. Because 5-cost 6,000 blockers are quite difficult to get rid of, these generally can absorb an attack. And because your life is going to absorb an attack as well, effectively this feels like it's absorbing 2 attacks. And while this alone is pretty strong, this alongside the 1-cost Quasar is what makes this card absolutely broken. Being able to put Irie Quasar help into your life via means like the 2-cost Yodi or naturally flipping it over from your life can instantly heal you back that life you just lost, as well as establishing a blocker on the board. So what's really the solution to this? Well, Wadi Lemons suggested pair banning Quasar and Borsellino, where you can still run Quasar, you can still run Borsellino, but you can't run them in the same deck. Daddy Sakurai 69 suggested to simply lock Borsellino, eroding the text, making it so that only Egghead type leaders can use it. This would make it so that decks that generally aren't doing that great in OP15, like Red Yellow Bonnie, Yellow Vegapunk, Yellow Luffy, may have a place due to the fact that only they're allowed to use this obscenely broken card. And then there's people like who say that we should just simply ban out the 5-cost Borsellino. Now, I think that if just a single card would be banned, it would make the most sense to ban the 1-cost Quasar due to the fact that we mentioned before. Quasar is an old card and also a common card, which would fit perfectly into the philosophy that I believe Bandai has when it comes to banning cards. The suggestion of a pair ban would also work, but would devastate a deck like Yellow Vegapunk. However, Bandai has shown before that they don't necessarily care that much about other decks taking peripheral damage when they ban things like the 4-cost Jinbei, which absolutely devastated Hancock. So I think that pair banning the two could be a reasonable reasonable possibility. Then there's the third option of errating the text to make so that only Egghead type leaders can use it. Now, they've never done this before. If they were to, in a way, errata the text, generally what they do was to ban out the card, like the red-purple law, and then make a substantially weaker version that people can still use if they want to, but good luck making that deck work. And so while I think that this would be a somewhat fair way to balance the game, because Bandai has no precedent of doing it in the past, I don't think that this would actually end up being the case of what they end up doing this time. Another suggestion, which actually no one ended up making, but one that I thought could be pretty interesting, though maybe not actually the best solution, is to consider pair banning the 2-cost Hiyori and the 1-cost Quasar. If you want to run the 5-cost Borsalino, sure, you're going to have to play it out of hand, but if you get that lucky trigger, you can still play it out of your life, but you have no way of putting it into your life via something like the 2K. If you want to put it into your life, you have to use things like the 2-cost Nyomba, which is a 1K counter, which doesn't feel as good as Hiyori. Truly, the problem about this combo is that all three of these cards are good on their own. Hiyori is a simple 2K, Quasar is a 3K, Borsalino is, completely absurd, but all of these together make one of the most disgusting combos within the game. So if you make it so that just one of these combos is a bit harder to use, then people aren't going to just be default putting in 12 cards into their deck to just have obscene survivability if they're playing yellow, but rather they're going to have to actually think about when they're making their deck, about if they want to put in those Quasars to actually increase that randomness factor, or if they want to put in other cards that are going to increase their consistency. Now, while I think this would be a clever solution, this is not what I think they would do, nor do I think it's actually the best option. I just think that it is a option to consider. I think that this simple combo of Quasar as well as Borsalino existing within the game is going to be problematic for as long as Quasar is in rotation, and it's going to still be a problem when extra regulation hits as well. This would limit Bandai's ability to create more effects that change the cards within your life and make it difficult to actually design more uniquely yellow feeling cards. So therefore, I think that probably the best way to deal with Borsalino, if they choose to, is to simply pair ban the 1-cost Quasar Help as well as the 5-cost Borsalino. Now, are they going to actually end up touching this combo? I'm not sure, because 5-cost Borsalino is a very, very new card. The West doesn't even have it yet because it comes out with OP15, but I think that by pair banning these two cards, you don't hurt the value of 5-cost Borsalino. It's still usable, but you don't have that overtuned 0-cost, you're the one who should disappear effect. Yes, it's going to devastate Vegapunk, but I've been shafted enough as a Vegapunk player, so I'm hoping that maybe by this combo being banned, they'll give us a couple of other new cards. The most brought up card after Pudding and Borsalino was actually Emu as a deck. How do we limit Emu's power without destroying the deck as a whole? Or I guess maybe if you like Emu as a deck, then you just want the deck to be destroyed as a whole. But I think this is actually a really interesting question, because hypothetically, let's say that 4-cost Pudding is banned. One of the biggest gatekeepers to Emu as a deck is 4-cost Pudding, and I feel like if 4-cost Pudding is banned, Emu may come back into the meta and be quite scary. Though the NL matchup is absolutely devastating for Emu, the other matchups, even including the Lucy matchup, who actually has access to a 4-cost event that gets rid of his stage, is actually going to be Emu favored. Decks like Hancock absolutely cannot win the game against Emu if Emu knows that the Hancock player doesn't run the 4-cost Pudding. It completely changes the playstyle of Emu into any sort of blue deck, and I think that it could make Emu a problem once again. So I think that if they do get rid of 4-cost Pudding, it would be reasonable to assume that they get rid of something from Emu as well, just as a preemptive measure to make sure that the deck doesn't become a huge problem within this meta. I don't know if they'll actually end up doing this because Purple NL exists right now, but if they do, what's the best way of targeting this deck? Basically every single card in this deck is core to the strategy. Banning any of the Elders makes so the deck just doesn't function. You get 4 Elders on the board and you're like, why am I called 5 Elders? But on the other hand, the most suggested card to ban, the 7-cost Stage, would completely cripple the deck's playstyle. I think that this is too far of a nerf for this deck if you wanted to actually still function as a deck in the way that Lucci was still possible to play after all the nerfs that he received. Emu as a deck was created with this 7-cost Stage in mind, so getting rid of the 7-cost Stage would cripple this deck far too much, and realistically simply wouldn't give the deck a chance within the meta ever. However, I think that Eater TCG actually gave a really smart answer. If we were to restrict Never Existed, the plus 4K event that Emu has, to 1 copy, this solves a lot of issues. Emu is extremely tanky in the late game once you get that 10-cost Gorose going, because basically every single turn you're going to be picking up counter events, and this is going to make your lethal further and further when you're fighting against Emu. By getting rid of the counter events that Emu has access to, they're a lot more fragile as a whole, making it a lot easier and more manageable to fight against the deck without actually ruining the identity of Emu as a whole. However, if you ban the card outright, then the Emu mirror is going to be completely cursed, as people are of course course going to be playing the 7-cost stage instead of the 1-cost stage. So by having this card at 1 copy, it's still really risky to put out the 7-cost stage, but as a whole would keep the deck the same while reducing its power. This video is already a lot longer than I expected it to be, so I won't go over every single card that you guys mentioned, but thank you so much if you have given me suggestions on what cards should or shouldn't be banned. But what's happening tomorrow is a banlist adjustment. That means that there could be cards that are being banned, of course, restricted, errata potentially, pair banned, but also some cards that could be unbanned. So let's talk about just a couple of cards that potentially may be unbanned. I think I've made a pretty reasonable argument for why Reject and Raigo shouldn't come back into the game, but there are other cards that exist that are in the conversation for being unbanned. The first one being the Red-Purple Law Leader. Now, I don't want to get into this leader too much. It's traumatic. Really, I almost quit the game in OP08 because of how powerful this deck is, and I think that people don't understand how disgusting, how broken this deck was back in the day. So for that factor alone, I can't even imagine it coming back. Yes, maybe it's not as strong now, but I do think that it has received significant buffs over time as well, whether it's the 4-cost promo law, and even recently being able to use a lot of NL's events, as well as potentially even the 6-cost NL very well as well. In my opinion, this leader effect even now is still too powerful and is too generic. So even if maybe the deck won't be that great in this meta, which I'm not even convinced of, I think that it could be a pretty solid meta contender if it existed today. But this may just be my trauma speaking. The second card that we have touched upon a little bit is the 8-cost Moria. Moria being able to play a 4-cost and a 2-cost rested and active out of your trash is very generically powerful for any black deck, and Bandai has printed a lot of actually better versions of Moria specifically tailored for the leaders that they're made for. So actually, if Moria came back into the game, the decks that would actually benefit from this aren't Moria, but actually Black Yellow Luffy and potentially even Black Emu. Emu being able to play a 4-cost Warcury as well as searching on the same turn is going to be really, really nice right before you go into your 10-cost Gold State turn. And Black Yellow Luffy, of course, has been the premier #1 user of this 8-cost Moria since the dawn of time. And actually, despite everything that I've said so far, I think that 8-cost Moria should stay banned, because I think that if Black Yellow Luffy existed in its previous form in the current meta with the current card pool that exists, with things like the new Secret Rare Luffy, again, a 5-cost card named Monkey D. Luffy, Black Yellow Luffy with 8-cost Moria could still be one of the strongest decks in the game, which is crazy to think about. There's a lot of uncertainty in this, and exactly how the meta is going to end up settling, we can't ever truly be sure of, but I think that there's enough potential for a deck like Black Yellow Luffy to still be broken if 8-cost Moria was unlocked, that this card, in my opinion, should stay banned. Now, the one card that I think actually should be unbanned is the 4-cost Jinbe. Even when this was banned, it was a bit of a head-scratcher, because at the time, Blue Doflamingo wasn't necessarily that powerful anymore, as stronger threats were being introduced with the new set. Despite this, they decided to ban the 4-cost Jinbe, which, although yes, what it says is powerful, the meta just wasn't good for it anymore, and it wasn't even really a preemptive change as well, because the restriction on the on-play effect wasn't generic, making it so that only Blue Hancock as well as Blue Doflamingo were really the only good users of this card. Now, if this card comes back, yes, you could play things like the 4-cost Hancock off of the 4-cost Jinbe in a deck like Blue-Yellow Hancock, but Blue-Yellow Hancock as a deck isn't necessarily a Warlord deck, but it's actually a Kuja Pirate / Amazon Lily deck. So aside from this one target, you don't really have that many targets, meaning that I don't think that bringing back this card is going to break any deck necessarily, because Blue Hancock already is pretty bad, and Blue-Yellow Hancock, at least in its current form, doesn't actually benefit from having a card like the 4-cost Jinbe. And so with this all being said, let's wrap it all up. In my opinion, the only card that should be outright banned is 4-cost Pudding. In the event that the 4-cost Pudding is banned, I think that Emu does need some nerfs as well, and I think that the best way to approach this is to reduce Never Existed in the first place down to 1 copy. Additionally, I think that Yellow as a whole has become far too powerful thanks to the Quasar as well as Borsalino combo, so these two cards should be pair banned together. And finally, the only card that I think should come off of the ban list currently is the 4-cost Jinbe. This is a lot of different ways of approaching different cards, but in my opinion, this is the best way to approach it. We'll see in the end if Bandai ends up going through with any of this. Maybe Bandai just decides to shoot a random card in leg for no reason, like, let's say, I don't know, 7-cost Zoro. Although, yes, it's a very strong card, it doesn't actually break the game in any way, and you're like, whoa, what did that card do? So who knows in the end what's actually going to end up being banned, but if I'm right, it's not going to be that much of a hot take, so I can't say I told you so, but I honestly think that these changes would make the game a lot better. Now, this all being said, I don't actually think the game is in a bad state right now. There's a very, very diverse meta. It's just that I think that purple NL as well as yellow decks are a little bit ahead of the rest. Unfortunately, because purple NL came on OP15, I don't necessarily think it's in the talks of being banned out quite yet, but if there is a card that should be banned from NL, get rid of the fucking 3-cost. Holy shit, dude, this card's so broken. Daddy Sakurai 69, Daddy Sakurai 16, Daddy Daddy Sakurai 69 suggested to simply lock Borsellino, eroding the text, making it so that only egghead type leaders can use it.